Okay, welcome to Chapter 22, Disaster Recovery and Data Integrity, page 387. Okay, now you guys are in for a treat. I'm saying that with a little bit of a smirk. This is a particular topic that's of great interest to me, and if that doesn't sound off some alarm bells in your head, I don't know what will. I like this topic. I expect to have an awful lot of test questions on this, right? Okay, good. All right, so obviously you're trying to plan for some sort of a disaster, a natural disaster, a fire, a flood, an earthquake, those kind of things. And then human problems. Now, don't immediately jump to the conclusion that hackers are the problem. Okay, they are. I'll admit that. But to tell you the truth, an authorized user who has the authority to do something is probably, working for you in your company, is probably your most deadly enemy. Because they're going to do something stupid. They're going to delete something they shouldn't delete. Are they going to copy something someplace where they shouldn't copy? Are they going to expose some customer data without knowing it? Right? It's the human element. The humans are the problem. Okay? Just telling you. All right. So, yes, planning for natural disasters, that one's kind of easy. Fire suppression and that kind of thing. Flood, don't put things on the first floor. Don't put it in the basement. Okay? But disaster recovery from, oops, I deleted the database. That one's a little bit more tough. Okay. So, all disaster recovery kind of sort of starts with a plan. You kind of sort of need to know what are the risks. You need to evaluate the risk. I mean, and there actually are sort of like actuarial tables. There's actually a map you can go to, and you click where you are. It'll tell you what is the possibility of a flood in percent, like a 1 in 10, 1 in 10,000 chance for an earthquake, and 1 in 20,000 chance for this, right? That kind of stuff. Lightning and flood and, all those kinds of things, dust storm, whatever. And so depending on where you are, you can go to these companies and put in your address, and it'll tell you what the most likely possibilities are for each one of these natural disasters. So again, you have to identify the risks first. For example, let's say you're in an area where natural disasters really isn't a big deal. But you have sensitive customer information like their credit card. So maybe, the human side of the house is where you'd be spending an awful lot of energy, right? Okay, just saying. Okay, now here's something that I like to talk about, so just bear with me. I'm going to talk about this a lot. And that is the entire terminology called disaster, recovery. Disaster recovery is probably not a good way to describe things. Let me explain. Let's say you go to a CEO of some company, and they may have an MBA from Harvard, a very smart guy or gal, but if you say disaster recovery, what they're going to be thinking in their head is insurance. It's like, hey, I need $5,000 to make it better for our disaster recovery. The guy's going to say, don't we already have insurance? It's like, that's not what we're talking about. So don't use that term. Use business continuity plan or business recovery plan. Now you've got his attention. Because what you're talking about is, if the roof got tore off the building, that's an insurance issue, right? But how long is it going to be down is a business thing. If it's going to be down for 5 days, that means he's making no profit whatsoever. If it's down for 1 day, then he's going to be feeling a lot better. Business continuity plan. If you make him understand that this is about getting you back to business, it'll make an awful lot of difference. Let me give you an example. This happened to me. It's mostly true story. It's not completely true, but I'm embellishing the facts. So we've got back in the old days when we used tape drives for doing backup. We had a tape drive and it worked okay, but we kept getting more and more data and more data. And it took about 4 hours to do a backup. And I went, oh man, that's bad. We need to go ahead and spend $5,000 on a new, faster backup tape, one that can handle things a lot more faster. So I went and said, hey, I need $5,000 to buy a faster tape backup. And the guy says, well, does the one we have work? I go, well, yeah, but it's slow. It takes like 4 hours to do a backup. And he goes, yeah, but don't you do the backups in the middle of the night? I go, well, yeah. They said, well, why do we care how long it takes? It's like, look, nobody cares how long it takes to do the backup. It's business continuity, which is the issue. And now you say, okay, boss, if the server died and we had to restore it in the middle of the day, do you want to be down for 4 hours? Or do you want to be down for 2 hours? What is that worth to you? Is that worth $5,000? And he goes, oh yeah, that's worth a heck of a lot more than $5,000. Here, please, take my money. See how you do it? Okay, it's all about resuming the business. How long are you going to be down? If your server melted to the ground and you had to restore, the speed of the backup ain't the thing. It's the speed of the restore. Okay. I am going to mention that again, but just bear with me. Okay. So I absolutely guarantee things like that are going to be on the quiz. So I hope you guys are paying attention. Okay, good. So risk analysis, page 388. So the first step is to perform some sort of risk analysis. Otherwise you might be overprotecting some things. Like you go through and put in some wild, sump pumps and, water alarms and, to keep your problem with flooding. But there is no flooding issue in your area. You're on top of a hill somewhere. Okay. Or you might be underprotecting something, or quite frankly, you could miss something completely. So having the risk analysis is about where to spend the money. Because you don't just want to say, again, you don't want to just go to your boss and go, hey, I need $15,000 to solve all these problems. You're going to have to go through them like with a business case and say, this is our most likely threat. Let's talk natural disaster, because that's just a little easier to wrap your head around. It looks like fire is going to be our number one thing, not flooding and not lightning. So we need to clear some brush around the outside of the building. We need to have smoke alarms. We did, all those kinds of things. Okay. So that kind of makes sense. So most people don't have the skills to do this in-house. We have other consultants that do this for a living, that do the risk analysis thing. Because they will come in and, they've done this for a living, right? And they can punch you out. It's not expensive for a consultant to come in and do a risk analysis for you. They'll talk to you about, what it is you do and, what's the likelihood of having, insider divulging information, things of that nature. So there's kind of a risk formula they show in the book. It's the cost of the disaster minus any mitigating thing like insurance times the risk. Okay, so let me give an example. Let's say there's a 1 in a million chance of a flood because you're on top of some hill someplace. And so, unless Noah Ark comes floating by, you're likely not going to have an issue. So I probably won't spend hardly any money at all on that. But if there's a 1 in 3,000 chance of an earthquake, okay, I might want to do something, okay? So any place, so the risk, the disaster would be the server's down. The disaster is we're not making any money, okay? Again, speak like you're talking to the CEO. The disaster is not the server failed. The disaster is we're not making any money. Okay? Okay, I'm glad you got this. So the cost of the disaster minus any insurance, and then times the risk. And that's how you do the formula to figure out what to do first. Okay? All right? You're never going to have enough money to solve them all, but you can hit the ones that come up first. Okay? So any place where there's a single point of failure. Let's say, for example, remember we talked about how, I have a whole set of replicas, but I have one load server appliance. Well, isn't that a single point of failure? Maybe I ought to have a spare. Have it configured. Maybe it still could be in the cardboard box. But if it died, then I go, oh, dang, and I pull it out and put it in, right? Any place where there's a single point of failure ought to show up in your risk assessment. Okay, on page 389, there could be some legal obligations here for restoring things. There's some laws, for example, the Health Insurance Protection Act, the HIPAA guys. If you're in the health business, it's very, very specific on, how you store things and how you encrypt the data and blah, blah, blah. So if you're a publicly traded company, well, then there's some things about, for example, I need to keep these records for this amount of time, that kind of stuff. Hang on a second, I'm going to fix that. Okay, so there may be an obligation for me to keep like emails and tax records for a long period of time, which means my backup system is basically part of my legal obligation. There's a term we use when we do risk assessment called due diligence. You have to show that not only do you know what it is you're supposed to do, that's the basic definition of due care. Due diligence means not only do I know what it is I'm supposed to do and I've done it, I've gone back and checked to make sure it worked. Okay? That's due diligence. Okay? And so if you're in a publicly traded company or you're dealing with healthcare data and those, maybe credit card data, depending on where you are, there could be some very specific requirements about how to store stuff and how do you restore it and all the rest of it. Okay. So let's talk about damage limitations on page 390. There really has to be a cost-benefit ratio here, right? Okay, in the example I talked about, where there's a 1 in a million chance of having an earthquake, okay? Let's just say that. I probably don't want to spend too much time with that, right? Because the cost of it. But let's talk about that. Sometimes the cost is practically nothing. For example, for an earthquake, perhaps not put it on the first floor. Okay, maybe. Put 19-inch rack, and bolt them to the floor so they're not like sitting on a desk someplace. For a flood, don't put the servers in the basement. So we're not really talking a lot of money, right? We're talking about, bolting 19-inch racks to the floor and making your server room not in the basement. Those are practically nothing, right? Maybe a lightning rod on the top of the building, right? These are minor. So if the cost is small and the benefit is large, what the heck? Go ahead and do it, right? Okay, good. So some of these mitigations are dirt cheap. And some of the recommendations after you've done your risk analysis, well, it's like, oh, geez, I'm going to have to spend, $1 million getting this part done. Okay. So, fire prevention, having a smoke alarms and fire suppression system, those are kind of expensive. Flood detection, I can detect a flood and I might have to have a sump pump, but that could be a little costly, maybe. Having an uninterrupted power supply, yeah, that's a little costly. I mean, if the power goes out and you still keep running, those kind of things, they cost a little, they're not much. Okay, so preparation on page 391. So sourcing replacement parts. Let's say, for example, when Hurricane Katrina went through New Orleans, you think you could just stop by your local Home Depot and pick up an emergency generator? Because clearly they're going to have those in stock, right? No. They're all going to be gone by the time you get there, right? Every single one of them. So you need to source these things well in advance and have them, okay? So for example, emergency generators is something that's pretty doggone important after a region-wide disaster. So you better get yours now. Know your vendors. Know who these people are. And know what they've got and what they got in stock. And so, rebuild and restore. So if some disaster has occurred, maybe the roof came off the building and I need to put plastic sheeting up in order to return to operation. I'm not going to repair the roof on the first day, but I might be able to get the servers back up and running, right? So how much do you have to be operational again? Again, we're talking from a disaster point of view, we're talking money. Okay, money, not server died, but I can't do business. So putting plastic tarp up over the hole in the roof means I could be operational. I don't have to solve all the problems. I don't have to have the roof repaired on the first day. Okay, good. Another way is have off-site backups. That's pretty much a given these days. Is so if you had a flood and wiped out the servers, this also would not wipe out your backups. Ooh, okay, that's bad. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works.